Nature-based solutions involve working with the natural world for the benefit of people and biodiversity. What this means in practice is restoring, protecting and connecting a diversity of natural habitats both on land and in the sea. It also involves sustainably managing our working lands, for example our croplands and also our timberlands, and it involves bringing nature into our cities using green infrastructure. The idea of a nature-based solutions is based on the rich understanding that natural habitats support human communities in countless ways. They provide clean air and clean water. They protect us from the impacts of climate extremes such as floods, heat waves and droughts. They also draw down and store carbon. The idea of a nature-based solution also reflects growing understanding that climate change and biodiversity loss share some of the same drivers and so should share some of the same solutions. For example, land use change is one of the biggest drivers of biodiversity declines. It is also the second biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. Protecting and enhancing our carbon stores through the protection and restoration of natural ecosystems should therefore in theory both help to slow warming whilst also protecting biodiversity. However, this outcome is by no means guaranteed. Much depends on how we implement nature-based solutions, where we do them and with whom we work. In this film we'll be exploring what nature-based solutions might mean for the Scottish Highlands. We'll be talking to different experts to find out more about the many benefits of working with nature in this environment. We'll be also discussing the various challenges there are to taking nature-based solutions to scale. And we will be discussing how different communities have worked together with farmers, with local businesses, with local organisations to address those challenges.
Cairngorms Connect is the largest ecological restoration project in the UK. So it covers 600 square kilometres here in the Cairngorms National Park. So it's a huge variety of habitats from the bottom to the top, from woodland, floodplain, right the way up to some of the high Arctic habitats that we've got here in the UK. And that sort of variety of habitats is really what, as Cairngorms Connect, we really want to restore and make it as healthy as possible on a really, really large scale. It's really important as we're moving into a changing climate that our habitats are resilient to change. So that change might be more flooding, it might be more wildfires, it might be more disease, tree diseases. If we have a larger woodland or a larger habitat, then that habitat is more resilient to those changes. Part of the woodland might be affected by those extreme events, but the rest of it is more stable. The same thing with viruses, or diseases, I should say, pests and diseases for trees. If you've got lots of different species within a forest, then those species that suffer from a disease might die out, but the other species within that forest are retained. Currently we have ancient pinewood here, and we think this pinewood's been here for 8,000 years or more since the last ice age. But we could find with climate change that this habitat changes. We could find that this becomes an oak woodland. So by having a more biodiverse ecosystem with lots of different species in it, you would find that the woodland would stay a woodland. It's just the composition of species might change through time. That makes it more resilient to change. If you just have a monoculture of single species and that species can no longer survive within that climate, it no longer functions as a woodland, it dies. A healthy forest is less susceptible to wildfires, for example. The same with peatlands. A healthy peatland is very, very wet, and it's hard to burn things that are very, very wet. So having healthy peatlands can mitigate wildfires, and having healthy woodlands with really thick, dense understories that create more humid conditions like this, again helps to mitigate against wildfires. You can plant plantations and you get carbon very quickly. Those trees grow very quickly, they capture carbon very quickly. But in terms of biodiversity, they're not the best. Some of our habitats need a bit of a helping hand, they need a little bit of a kickstart. We are in a climate emergency, and so we feel it's important to act on that now. So this is actually an old plantation forest. Being a plantation, it's all single species, it's all Scots pine in here. All the trees are planted really close together, it's quite dark in the understory, and so we're trying to brighten that up. Creating these gaps where light can get in onto the ground is better condition for a lot of the broadleaf species that we really want to get back in here to improve that biodiversity. We pull the trees over with winches to try and simulate wind throw, with trees getting blown over by the wind. We've also taken the crowns, the tops off the trees to create totem poles of standing deadwood that is really good for birds to nest in and invertebrates to live in. But also doing it in this way, where we're pulling the trees over, we're creating a bit of mess. The root balls that are brought up as the tree gets pulled over, they're really good places for seedlings to get away and broadleaf species to sort of take root. All of this deadwood will decompose and decay, and a lot of that goes back into the soil and creates self-sustaining, healthy soils which will support the habitats in the longer term. So it is a bit of a compromise with carbon. Obviously there will be a small release of carbon during this process, but really this is a long-term vision. What we're trying to do here is to promote biodiversity, promote natural processes and create resilience within the woodland. And then as time goes on, natural processes will take over and this will all happen naturally. Over the next 2 years, well until 2023, we're targeting restoring 1,400 hectares of peatlands and expanding pine woodlands by 600 hectares and other native woodlands by 800 hectares. So we all know that expanding woodlands also locks carbon into the trunks and into the soil. And so expanding our native woodland, ideally by natural regeneration, is a high priority for Cairngorms Connect. And we feel that would be a significant contribution to managing carbon within our environment.
A short distance away, on the shores of Loch Ness, the people of the Bunloit estate are pioneering sustainable, biodiversity-friendly forestry and regenerative farming. Their goal is to transform degraded land, informed by science and in close partnership with the local community.
We have this rare opportunity here where we are in a fortunate position to do some research, and part of it is funded, part of it is, through our own sort of capital. But we believe the long-term gain, even for our estate, we will benefit from the work we are putting in now, even if we don't get an immediate return from it. It is like investing in the future. So basically the first year after we acquired the estate is all used for baseline surveys. So we want to make sure we capture exactly where we are at the moment, and that is partly for us to produce the evidence that our interventions were successful. We not just focus on the woodland, that is my expertise, but we do like invertebrates, we do mammals, we do birds, lichens, mosses. Across everything that you find in the estate, we will have a baseline survey for. So we started putting out bat detectors across the estate, and to our surprise, I think we found more species than we expected to find here. So that is a positive surprise. In my opinion, we are fortunate that we have wild boar here. It's very few locations in Scotland where we have wild boar, but also people are a bit scared. Change is not something that people easily embrace, so we have to take the local community with us and not do things in isolation. So that is one challenge that we have. If you want to live in a wilder environment, we have to learn again how to live with species that have been extinct for centuries now, but they used to be part of this environment and of this landscape, and they are still part in other landscapes in Europe, not far away from us. People live with lynx, wolves and bears, and we've just you've forgotten on how to manage to live with them together. And I think that is a big journey for us ahead if we really take this back to nature, rewilding agenda seriously. Obviously, one of our missions is to carbon sequestration and try to capture as much carbon as possible and store it in above ground but also below ground. And there it works sort of hand in hand with biodiversity. Just 200 meters away from here, it's got Sitka spruce plantation, and it's complete darkness in there. There's hardly any wildlife, you hardly hear a bird, and there's no vegetation on the ground other than spruce needles.
The problem is, many are seeing plantations of non-native species such as this one as a silver bullet climate solution. They are not. Single species tree plantations tend to be risky, short-term carbon stores, as they have lower resilience to pests and fires than native biodiverse woodlands, meaning that their carbon is quickly returned to the atmosphere. When they replace native ecosystems, they are also bad for biodiversity. They damage the health of the soils, reducing their water content and the diversity of life within them, which in turn reduces their capacity to draw down and store carbon.
There's a certain part on Bunloy Estate where you're in a plantation, it's all dark and not nice, and suddenly you come to the end of the track and it just opens up to this bright green, beautiful light, open habitat that's just got so much greenery, colours, birds singing. You're on the edge of the plantation and it's just the opposite on either side. The majority of our wildlife is down in that area. So we have the badger set, we've got pine martens down there, wild boar, the deer as well, roe deer and sika deer, red squirrels as well. Just every Scottish species you could think of we have down there. So it's a really special place.
Those planter trees are on their first rotation, so if you remove them now, you'll still find lots of plants and seeds in the seed bank. So if the longer you wait, the less likely it is that you can restore these plants that are still down in the seed bank. So that is another reason why we want to do these interactions as soon as possible. It will be a big change if we fell 20-25 hectares of commercial plantation on our estate, but we strongly believe it will be beneficial even within the next 10-15 years. Now, if you look into other countries, like across Europe, they've managed to grow conifers in continuous cover regimes, so they don't clear fell like 20, 50, 100 hectares of Sitka spruce at a time and then restock it and come back another 40 years. If you then look how much money you have to spend on replanting everything, to weed, to spray, it's a lot of money. It is just more, how do I put it, it is easier and almost a bit lazy management, to be honest. Requires more interaction, more frequent interaction with continuous cover forestry, but you will save costs for, you don't replant, you work with what comes naturally. So you have huge cost savings there. And if you work not just with one species, you also are less imposed to a risk. If a disease comes in that takes out one species, you will lose your entire plantation. So if you work with 2 or 3 commercial species on one site, you eliminate that risk as well. So there are huge benefits to changing the way that big forest operations are done in the UK at the moment. So we will sell our timber to sawmills that then deliver their products to local timber frame companies to build like eco-friendly homes in the Highlands.
We generally build what people refer to as eco-houses. They're very responsible environmentally. In Europe, 40% of greenhouse gas emissions relate directly to the built environment, one way or the other. In the UK, 50% of all commodity use, all materials, is used by the built environment sector, building infrastructure and housing and other buildings. And surprisingly, 50% of all waste is produced by that sector. So it is significant. We need to change things
profoundly in relation to how we do things. And the good news is that when we change these things, the outcomes are entirely beneficial. We're not giving anything up. We're actually making positive changes that affect ourselves directly in our own time, but also future generations. In using timber, we're locking up carbon for hundreds of years. This is a straightforward opportunity, effectively, to actually capture carbon and draw it back down for a useful purpose. Most housing in this country isn't doing that. It's an emitter of carbon into the biosphere, not the other way around. The RIBA Climate Challenge, we have been meeting this for the past 10 years. This is not a difficult thing to do, but you have to change your approach in order to achieve it. What we've had over the past industrial period is industrial forestry, and what we actually need to move towards is a balance of woodland. And what I mean by that is that monocultures are never a good idea in food production or land management or anything else. And if we look at nature, that's what nature's trying to do. It's trying to have this balance of health and diversity. What's fundamental really is sourcing as much of our materials as possible locally. There are a number of benefits to that. The obvious one is material miles and less pollution and less energy use to kind of move materials, quite heavy materials around. But there are other reasons as well, and it's to do with changing our economy from an extractive base to a regenerative base. We're building a better economy in the Highlands at the same time as building better buildings. So the decisions we're making today are going to impact on people in several generations into the future.
But woodland is just one of the valuable carbon-rich ecosystems that needs restoring.
So something like 12% of the UK is covered by peat. It's all over, it's in the uplands, it's in the lowlands. Historically, a lot of it, particularly in the lowlands, has been drained for agriculture. That's exposed all of that wet organic matter to oxygen, and that speeds up the decomposition rate by orders of magnitude. As it's decomposing, all of that carbon that's been building up pretty much since the last ice age, so it's been converted to carbon dioxide and emitted to the atmosphere. So peat's one of our biggest emission sources from land use. It's something like potentially up to about 4% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions are coming from peat. So we've gone from having a small carbon sink into having a very large carbon source. So a lot of the research we're doing now is about trying firstly just to stop that happening. How do we bring the water levels back up? How do we reconcile that with the continued productive use of the land? And actually, can we start to turn these areas back into carbon sinks? So are there ways we can actually use them as part of our climate mitigation strategy to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere?
A third of the estate is peatland to various depths. We consulted with leading experts. We've had people from the Peatland Action Forum here. We had people from Forestry and Land Scotland here. We had Rewilding Europe people here. And so we listened to what these experts have to say and then make an informed decision. We did a survey there as well, like a peat depth survey. And we found areas where the peat is about close to 4 meters deep. And based on the consultation and research we've done, I proposed a few amendments. We now have an amendment in place and we can harvest some of the plantations on the deep peat, for example. The key impact would have been the ground preparation on the deep peat. So they have plows that a meter and more deep, they go into the ground, and then they produce these mounds where they stick the trees in the ground to get them away from the moisture. Because the way they grow on these little mounds, they just pushed over easily by the wind. So it is not even commercially viable to continue these plantations on the bog. You know, the carbon balance will not be in your favor because you disturb the ground, remove trees. But within 10 or 15 years, we hope that the ground and the peat bog restores and then helps us to capture more carbon. So in the short term, we might have not the impact that we wish for, but the long-term gain will outweigh the interventions that we are proposing to do now.
With so much effort going into carbon sequestration and biodiversity conservation, one might be surprised to see cattle in the meadows of Bunloit.
At the moment, we have a farmer from the village who grazes his Highland cows on the estate.
Yes, my father was a farmer, my grandfather a farmer. Shepherds originally from way back. My family tree goes way back, shepherds. So as a farmer, you have your favourites. I've got my black-faced sheep. Economically, I probably shouldn't have them, but I do love them. People think sheep are stupid. Sheep are not stupid, and a black-faced sheep is probably the least stupid of any sheep. It can survive and find food. They won't stand in a field waiting to be fed. They'll go looking for food. So I think that has been fantastic. Believe it or not, as a farmer, I've never been a fan of subsidies. I'm a bit like my black-faced breed. I'm a bit independent. On the flip side, I couldn't farm and make a living what I've got without subsidies. And that is a bad way to be. You're sort of forced to take them because you can't afford not to take them. The grazing situation in Bunloit, the sheep have gone off that sheep and we're grazing cattle instead. So that seems to be the way to encourage more biodiversity. So it's very interesting. We didn't actually have to put forage out to feed them. They actually foraged the whole winter with nothing, and it wasn't an easy winter. It was a hard winter here in the Highlands. It's amazing. That's actually amazing. So that's a revelation for myself to have cattle and I'm not actually able to manage to get them through the winter with no feeding at all. I've got commercial cattle there. We feed them all winter, and the college, we get told £800 for keeping a cow for the year. The wintering of that would probably be more than half. You know, if you're saving that kind of money, you know, it's brilliant. You can afford to have less of them. The increase of biodiversity, the health of the animals improve, so that's very exciting, the different plants. And say that farmers don't do change and don't adapt. They don't know farming, you know, or
There is change coming up, and people, like as a nation, Scotland or the UK, recognise that we can't manage our land the way we've done it for the last few hundred years. Going forward, I think our key mission is to set an example of how land management can work, and not just work in terms of increasing biodiversity, but also work commercially from a landowner's perspective. Because if there are no incentives for a landowner, why would you just change your management regime if you would lose out money? And it's not a viable system on the bigger picture. We really need to find a way that every landowner in Scotland or the UK or in Europe can benefit from working with the nature and increasing biodiversity.
Restoring, protecting and connecting our natural habitats is not about keeping people and nature separate. It's not about nature versus the economy, but about bringing us together in thriving landscapes. Nature-based solutions are place-based partnerships between nature, farmers, businesses and community members, old and young. In this film, we have showcased just 2 examples from the Scottish Highlands, but there are many more, and it's essential that we ensure that these projects are financially supported and scientifically studied so that they can be taken to scale to provide benefits over the long term for people, nature and climate.
I like the